Hello, everybody. Firstly, I would like to extend my gratitude to the organizers of this conference, not only for hosting the conference and organizing it, but also for facilitating the option to present online. I really appreciate this flexibility and the opportunity to share some of the work with you. So my name is Jasmin Seijbel, and I'm currently a PhD candidate at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And my research is on anti-Semitism within Dutch professional men's football. I focus on anti-Semitic discourse both in digital and physical football spaces, but today I will dive in to the history of anti-Semitism within Dutch football and discuss the different responses from civil society organizations, football clubs, different authorities and other stakeholders on anti-Semitism in football since the 1980s. And I will demonstrate that significant actions against anti-Semitism in football have been either inadequate or lacking for the most part until very recently. So the outline of today's presentation, I will first talk a little bit about this image of Ajax being a Jewish club. Then I will briefly talk about some of the relevant anti-discrimination legislation. Then I will move on to discuss anti-Semitism and how it changed since the 1980s, discuss the different responses of stakeholders, and we will dive in a little bit deeper to this one particular case study. And then finally, I will talk a little bit about the current challenges we face in the Netherlands in dealing with anti-Semitism in Dutch football. So, as you probably all know, football is a well-known site for different forms of exclusion and discrimination, as are many other sports. But with anti-Semitism, it's often targeted towards supporters and players of clubs that are casted as Jewish. So in the Netherlands, we have this one club, which is Ajax, and they are seen as a Jewish club. Before the Second World War, there were several smaller Jewish football clubs in Amsterdam, but also in different parts of the country, and they were a regular target of anti-Semitism, of anti-Jewish insults, and even fights. However, Ajax was not one of those clubs. Ajax was not founded as a Jewish club, and its Jewish identity largely stems from its geographic location in Amsterdam, as well as its location within the city during the interwar period, because in Amsterdam, most Dutch Jews lived during that time. And then again, the stadium was located in the east of the city, very close to the Jewish neighborhood, so it had a relatively high Jewish supporter base. And in addition, supporters traveling from outside of the city made this association of Ajax and the Jewish neighborhood because they had to travel through it to visit the stadium. Also, since the 1930s, the Netherlands has had laws making discriminatory insults against groups a criminal offense. So I will not read this complete piece of legislation, but it basically states that any person who in public, either verbally or in writing or through images, intentionally makes an insulting or discriminatory statement about a group of people is punishable by criminal law and faces imprisonment or a monetary fine. And this is also relevant to football. There's been a noticeable shift in the nature and scope of anti-Semitic expressions in Dutch football since the late 1970s and the 1980s. During this period, earlier slurs and songs changed into more explicitly anti-Semitic chants, such as "We Go Jew Hunting," but also chants referencing the Holocaust, for example. And Ajax was still the main target of this behavior. However, they were not the exclusive target. It was also during this time that Ajax supporters increasingly started to use Jews or Super Jew as a self-reference or a badge of honor. And this is also something that you can see at the picture from the National Archives. Here you see a group of Ajax supporters clearly making references to this supposed Jewish identity. And therefore also reinforcing this existing identity. Supporters of different professional men's groups men's teams started using anti-Semitic rhetoric as well as philo-Semitic rhetoric and anti-Jewish symbolism to create in-group identities, express rivalries, which persists in and around football stadiums until today. So various stakeholders responded differently, obviously, and it varied from seeing anti-Semitism as just banter to criticizing the police for not doing their job well enough. So, for example, anti-Semitism in football was not really seen as real anti-Semitism and mostly disregarded as banter. So a clear example of this is that Feyenoord, in response to a letter they received from an organization dedicated to combating anti-Semitism, urging Feyenoord to address the growing anti-Semitic rhetoric on their stand, stated that, they also shout "dog dick." You don't hear the Animal Protection Agency complaining about that, do you? In response to this letter. So this very clearly shows that they did not really take anti-Semitism serious at this point in time, and they thought that the organization dedicated to combating anti-Semitism, did not really understand what was happening in the field, inside the stadium. They were not the only football organization or football club that responded in this manner. A couple of years later, in the 1980s, there was another incident, and there was a group of supporters that was chanting anti-Semitic chants, referencing the Holocaust, making Nazi salutes, as well as bringing anti-Semitic banners with swastikas. And this newspaper article shows that the police was standing around them, not really interfering, but just somehow facilitating this kind of behavior. And the Anne Frank Foundation described it as very shocking that a group of football supporters were able to chant anti-Semitic slurs referencing Hitler and the Holocaust under the watch of a large number of police officers without any action being taken against it. And they said what offended us the most is that the police were clearly focused on preventing broken windows and damage to cars. And they said that it seemed that they created this kind of space where things that are actually legally prohibited under the piece of legislation that I showed earlier were actually legally prohibited elsewhere, were now allowed in this football context. And they said the government cannot prevent someone from shouting something, but it can take action when someone breaks the law. In this same article, ADO Den Haag officials were asked to step up and address their fan base to make sure that they would not repeat this kind of behavior. And this was not really taken seriously by the ADO Den Haag officials, because they said, should I also apologize every week because someone has insulted the referee or a player, then it never ends. So basically disregarding the fact that what is happening is discrimination, anti-Semitism. And again, the representatives from the Anne Frank Foundation were shocked to hear the views of the chairman of FC Den Haag, claiming that there was no deliberate anti-Semitism involved, and that it is a warning to supporters to refrain from racist language was unnecessary. So in this one incident, you see the different responses. So clearly the Anne Frank Foundation and other organizations that are dedicated to combating discrimination wanted the police to step up. Well, the football organizations said, it's not real anti-Semitism. It's targeted against Ajax. It's not targeted against Jews. If we have to say something about it, we will be, it will never end. And on the other hand, the police more focused on maintaining order and not necessarily looking at verbal violence, more at physical violence. Then I want to move on to this particular case. We're a bit further in time again. It's April 1999, and Feyenoord celebrated their national championship victory at the Rotterdam City Hall. And one of their players, a defender, in front of 100,000 attendees, started chanting from the balcony. And he started chanting, "Who does not jump is a Jew." He repeated it several times. And after this incident, which was filmed and there were so many people present, the public prosecution decided to investigate whether the player could be charged with discrimination. However, ultimately they found no criminal offense, and the press officer stated that in the context of these statements, it is no criminal offense. So the football context was taken into account. If it had been said in a different context, it might have been a criminal offense, but because of the football context, the public prosecution argued that it was not, because they said they labeled the chant as inappropriate and ill-judged, but not discriminatory, as it is a common use in provoking Ajax supporters within Dutch football. As such, the public prosecution did not acknowledge that unintentional forms of anti-Semitism and discrimination can be exclusionary in their consequences. And the player may have meant to be provocative toward Ajax, but he used Jew in a negative manner in front of 100,000 people, and by doing so he reproduced anti-Semitic discourse and created a hostile environment for Jews in football. And here you can see some pictures of the celebrations where this particular anti-Semitic incident happened. So, yeah, how should we go about this? How should we deal with anti-Semitism within Dutch football? Already since the 1980s, there have been calls for educating fans, and in addition to punish them for anti-Semitism in the context of the sport. And despite these calls, it took quite some time to come up with a response. And in relatively recently, starting in 2015, some professional football clubs, in cooperation with, for example, the Anne Frank House, the Anne Frank Foundation, developed educational projects to prevent and combat anti-Semitism in their stadiums. And what we also see is that increasingly the public prosecution, the police are working together and are charging people for anti-Semitism or other forms of discrimination within sport. And a very relatively recent example is a combination of both punishment as well as education, as a judge court-ordered people who made an anti-Semitic graffiti in the context of football to visit the Holocaust Museum. So what are some of the current challenges? Anti-Semitism in Dutch football is increasingly taken serious by most stakeholders involved. However, the just banter narrative remains prominent among supporters as well as among clubs. Anti-Semitism in the context of football is not it does not stay within the stadium, obviously, and football-related anti-Semitic behavior is reproduced in stadiums, bars, but also online and on different social media platforms. So this is really something we have to take into account in this day and age, and different cultural products contribute to the normalization and reproduction of anti-Semitism in football. Although seemingly aimed at the football other, they contribute to a normative discourse in which being Jewish is undesirable.